Hello everyone, my name is Uthris and welcome back to another episode of Space Engineers. We are going to be continuing work on this small ship series. At least small ship initially. We'll eventually get to bigger things, bigger and better things. But we'll go over quickly what we did last episode. We made these two fighters here on the right, a light and heavy fighter. One is light armor and light armament, and another one a little bit more heavy armament and dual cockpit and heavy armor. They both have about the survival rate of a paper bag, but that's okay because, I build these things not really to be 100% effective, but to look kind of nice and be kind of effective. Maybe, I don't know. You be the judge of that. I plan on releasing this pack, by the way. I'm going to be doing that once we finish the smallest lineup of ships. There's only really 2 left to go, and so that's going to bring me to what we have today. Today we're going to be working on a new design for another militaristic vessel. We're going to be making I guess you could say a bomber, but it's not really dropping anything. It's more like a rocket, kind of an RPG type of platform. And I hope you guys enjoy the looks of that once I finish building it. So let's just hop into it. We'll talk about kind of some design decisions, and without further ado, let's get to building. Hello everyone, and here we are at the speed build. This is a little bit of an interesting ship to design. One of the biggest things that's going to be different from our fighters compared to this one is that we are going to try and put the actual seat and cockpit area on the back side of the vessel and actually have the nose come out forward very prominently to hold all the cargo and rockets that this thing is going to be housing. So the engine design is going to be a little bit different, and in doing so, it's also going to be a little bit different wing design. So everything kind of about this ship, while we're going to be trying to adhere to the design language of our previous ones, it's all going to be just a little bit new, a little bit refreshing in my opinion, and hopefully you guys like the looks of it as much as I do and the way it turned out. So initially, just like with other builds, I start with the cockpit and kind of engine placement because that is going to give the bulk of the silhouette to this vehicle. And when it comes to silhouettes, they're very important. Readability from a distance is really a feature that you want to have on your ships. And in fact, this kind of swept arm design, I'm kind of getting this inspiration directly from our industrial vessels back on the other side of, on the left there. And that is to make this thing feel a little bit more bulky, heavier, as if it's got like just a front punch to it. I don't know if that is a sign of maybe what I should name it eventually, but it's a pretty cool ship. I like the way this thing turned out a lot. And we're going to be using the reloadable rocket pods so that this thing can carry a lot of rocket ammo and actually be a proper attack vessel when it comes to assaulting either large grid ships that are atmospheric, because this is an atmospheric bomber, or static bases on the ground. This thing really shouldn't be used against fighters, though I'm sure it could be, slightly devastating. Rockets do a decent amount of damage, so, it's just something to consider. This thing really should not be used in those fighter engagements. Really, it should be escorted by fighters so that it can proceed on with its mission to bomb out a whole territory with a fleet of these things and just throw fire at the enemy rapidly and over and over and over. So the overall design, I'm kind of making a gun barrel if you think about it, right? It's just long cylinder full of cargo to carry rockets, and then the barrel essentially ends here at the tip with a bunch of rocket pods. Initially, I tested this design out. We're going to go through kind of an initial discovery phase of internals, trying to get the balance power correct, try and get how much damage do I want this thing to pump out for being a light armored ship versus other vehicles of roughly its class. And by class, I mean my other vehicles that I have there, which make wonderful target dummies. And then also balancing that with design, because, you know, for me, I gotta make a cool looking ship or else I'm not satisfied. I would want to fly around in it, you know. I could make the most functional ship in the world, but to me, that's not where I get my enjoyment from. So this first design is kind of discovering the lines of the ship, how I want everything to be connected. So we start out with this very large flat surface, right? You know, I wanted this thing to have a large wing area so that it looked like it could actually kind of get enough lift. But the interesting thing about it, right, is we have this huge flat nose, right? We have 2, 4, 6, 8 rocket pods on the front, and that's 8 rockets. That's a lot of firepower just directed forward like that. In fact, it might be too much firepower, and you'll see I cut this down later, but this is the starting point, right? And I don't always make a finished vessel in a single sitting. You know, this is a couple sittings to record this, and, you know, I'll build it for a little while, not maybe like the way it's turning out, and then come back to it a bit later with some fresh eyes, and then just rework some stuff. The top, I wanted it to not be perfectly flat, so we put some ribbing across there. Just a quick pattern-like design. The reversing kind of thrust on the sides here, I wanted to have a little bit of a visibility into there, so we kind of cut a hole in the wing because, you know, a lot of our other ships, and, you know, there's a lot of visibility to the internals. There's a lot of kind of stubby little wings just to make it look like it has some aerodynamics. We are in vanilla Space Engineers, and this is a vanilla spaceship. So it's going to be adhering to those physics rather than, say, someone who has like the atmospheric flight model mod installed and things like that, right? So it's really important for me to make the thing look like it's structured and like it can carry its own weight. So we'll add some under ribbing. I experimented with adding a little bit of a swept tip along the edge, change up the ribbing on the center a little bit just to kind of make it pop a little bit more. And then we try and start wrapping the front end. And this is kind of the point where I realized that the ship is basically a big T. It's a big T shape, right? We got a straight part where the engines are in the cockpit, and then it comes forward to the weapon bay at the front. And trying to incorporate that into something that looks like it could actually fly in atmosphere, definitely a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. You can see it's just a snub nose. It's just going to hit that wall of air and just ram its way through it. It might look better if it was an actual spaceship, but that's not the case, right? So I'm going to go ahead and cut a large portion of the wings off, and also get rid of the additional rocket pods on the side. Now from here, we've already kind of built up, and I've kind of gotten used again to the design language of our other vehicles, and we're just going to refine this at this point, right? There's too much armor plating, it's too bulky looking, it's too flat and boxy, so we got to cut some things away. We got to start revealing some of the internals. Maybe instead of extending the rocket pods on the side, you can experiment with a defensive turret, something different. Turret did not look good, so ended up going with a rocket pod. And then because of that, I kind of thought this looked like a gun barrel design anyways. Well, why don't I just etch in actual 2 gun barrels across the top, you know, so the rockets can fire freely within the armor that's surrounding there. And I thought that was really cool. I was really happy with the way that ended up turning out, and, you know, using wedge pieces to keep the profile low, some higher wedges just to make it look a little bit more ribbed and supported in areas. And then we start working on, you know, tying that into the front. I don't want to perfectly cover up everything. Again, I am looking for that combination of form and function. So Getting that form right is kind of initial, and then also making sure it operates in the sense that, yeah, it can fly, and yeah, you can, load it full of cargo. That's why all these designs have the connector at the bottom. It's so that we can dock it and load it just fine, and it's all piped up and it's all good to go. It's survival ready, I guess you could say. That's a pretty common way to describe it. It's survival ready. I decided I really like the opening of the reverse thrusters, and so instead of having the wing come forward, we're just going to have a strut coming out from it and over and kind of hugging over the thruster, but having that ventilation kind of gap in there, because that looks really cool. Also, don't cover up rocket ports. You end up blowing up your own ship, guys. That's that. It's so funny to watch me watch this sped up, because you can just see how derpy it is. I'm just like, yeah, let's get in and shoot some rockets. Pew, 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 pew. Sorry, that just made me laugh. So, keeping with the normal design of my fleet, we're adding some winglets, some smaller version of what we had there at the start, something that doesn't go all the way quite to the front of the ship. Maybe starts 2/3 the way down. That way it doesn't look as boxy. And the fact that it's held on by a strut over the engine makes it look lighter than maybe it is, right? Because you can kind of see up through there. It's not just a wall of blocks coming at you. It's a little bit more interesting as a design. Always test your vehicles. Always make sure they can fly, especially as you start adding armor in places, because the weight is going to change. Your power needs are going to change. Your thruster needs are going to change. 2 thrusters at the beginning might turn into 4 thrusters by the end. You don't really know until you actually start testing it. Piping this thing up to the cockpit so that if we do have oxygen tanks or something stored in there, we can actually fly at a higher altitude and not worry about oxygen running out for our pilot. We can go ahead and talk about, I guess, the Gatling. We added Gatling guns on the front. I don't think you guys saw that. This is going kind of quick. So I know I've gotten a few comments in the past where some people have complained that they can't really use this to follow along. And I understand that, trust me, I really do. These aren't tutorial videos in the sense of, this is the best way to build a ship. No, these are inspirational. Something so that you guys can kind of just peek into my head and what I'm thinking about when I'm building these type of stuff. That's the point of a speed build. If you guys want an actual proper tutorial, that's a longer video. It's a little bit more of a boring format, right? Because I have to sit there and in real time explain everything that I'm doing. And that's a proper way to learn something, right? You don't go and watch a speed painting of an artist to try and learn how to draw. You're just not going to understand what they're doing. So this is a very high level video. It looked like the back wings, the vertical kind of surface areas wasn't quite supported enough, so I added another beam and then kind of shored up the shape of it a little bit more. And you'll find that I do a lot of trial and error. It's a lot. I'll add a section, I'll delete a section, I'll keep working on it, trying to make an interesting shape in the confined space that we have here, such as this back end and how we're coming out almost like a handle on top. And then from the bottom, I'm going to connect this with like a 45 degree. So it's like this big kind of bulky framework that this whole engine bay is kind of hanging on to. And I don't want to just make that perfectly smooth. I could, right? It'd be far more protection for our batteries and a very vulnerable section of the ship, the back end of it, right? But just like a Tiger tank, I just don't think, I'm going to get shot at from behind all the time, right? This thing's going to be charging at a base head on. So maybe the armor plating on the front should be a bit heavier than the back. Sure, that's a weakness, and I'm aware of it. But, it's... Maybe adding too much weight would slow it down, be less maneuverable. Maybe adding a whole bunch of blocks might just not look good. so I don't do it. It's just those compromises that I do to help kind of sell the vessel as a whole. At this point, we're kind of just doing internal plating, making sure some plating are kind of there, tying together a lot of the other elements, partially covering up a lot of the batteries. I do like to expose the batteries, the charging, and how much charge is in each one, so it's instantly visible to see how much battery life is in there, even though you're not in the ship itself. Some underplating for, the engines, just in case, so they don't get hit square on and instantly explode. They do survive, 3 shots instead of 1 shot. So, that's a 3 times effectiveness rating, in my opinion. It's not much, but it definitely helps. Fly around, added a whole bunch of armor, right? So we gotta fly around and make sure it functions. Shoot some test vehicles out of the sky. Look at the wreckage, see how well it breaks apart. I actually shot a copy of itself there just to see kind of its weaknesses. Here, I'm discovering that the thrusters, the kind of lateral thrusters, are being damaged by the reversing thrust, because I do have thrust damage on. It's vanilla. I want that damage to be there. And I want that to be my challenge as a designer, to make this thing look good while dealing with that, right? Because I know a lot of people download mods to hide thrusters within blocks and turn off thruster damage. I think that's fine. People can for sure play like that. I like the challenge of the other thing, right? And it also makes my ships fall apart kind of like this when I just crash into the lake. Yes. Painting. Painting is kind of my least favorite thing to do in Space Engineers. It'd be much easier if I had the good colored sense before I laid out the blocks and actually just laid it out in the correct color without having to worry about painting it. Painting, it's fine as long as you don't have to remove too many blocks to complete the area that you're doing, right? So sometimes there might be a half block covering up something, and you can see partial of the block behind it. You have to delete the half block, paint the part behind it, replace the half block. So you're kind of like repiecing together your vessel. The paint color scheme itself, just like our other military craft, is going to be white for a lot of the wings and armor plating, and then gray for structural elements and the undercarriage for the most part, so that it kind of pops. It has that two-tone contrast that I like. Anyways, that's it for the speed build. I know it's fast. We're going to go ahead and take a little bit of a slower peek at the vessel, and then you guys can definitely leave your comments on how you think it turned out, and we'll hop into that. Okay, here we are. Welcome to the final kind of overview of today's build. We got the whole lineup here, pretty much in the same view as we started today's episode, and this here in the front is our new bomber, rocketeer. I don't know what to really call this thing. Again, if you guys have any good naming suggestions for this, I might need your help, because I don't know what its proper term should be. Anyways, as you can see, comparing it to the other vehicles, it is in the classic kind of white with dark gray undertones, so it does blend in quite nicely. It kind of reminds me of a good little mashup between one of our fighters and industrial ships, which is really nice. I'm happy I was able to get kind of a midpoint between these two, in a way. Yeah, and I hope you guys agree with that. So, unlike the fighters, its weaponry is kind of inverted, right? So we have 5 reloadable rocket pods, and then 2 Gatling guns. The rocket pods are its primary weapon. The Gatling guns are kind of its fallback secondary weapon. The rocket pods are kind of, ideal for stationary targets, stations, small bases, larger kind of ships, so you can kind of do a bombing run with these things. And they're kind of just throwaway vessels. I think I'll probably get a lot of complaints about my ship design by simply people who think that they should be able to absorb more damage than maybe they expect them to. I don't build these things to be 100% effective or or 100% aesthetic. I kind of try and get a happy medium ground to where, yeah, you can fly around, it can shoot rockets, it can load those, it's all piped up, you know, it has some cool lights, and it looks nice while doing so. That's the point of my builds, so take it from that perspective, I'd say. We got some lights, we got some, you know, front kind of blinking lights. We have the red and green wingtip lights as well. The nice thing about this design is the cockpit is in the rear. Decided to change that and break all current design choices from the previous 5 builds and put it in the back. I thought it would be a good change. And also, you know, this thing is kind of a strafing. It's going to dive towards its target. It's going to unload a whole bunch of rockets and then fly away, right? It's not going to really, hopefully, linger in the area. So I wanted to have a little bit of a bulk before you actually get to the cockpit, so they don't kind of get taken out immediately, right? Because what you'd want to have if you were assaulting a base is a couple bombers and a couple fighters to protect the bombers from other fighters, right? So this thing should not be engaging fighters. These should be fighting fighters. These should be making bombing runs on a base or a larger ship. So that's what I think how it should be done. But hey, maybe when it's eventually up for download, you guys will find a fun use for it. There's not much I can say about the design, except for it looks kind of industrial, platey, weighty, but also light in certain areas, right? Just kind of leaving gaps in the wing so that you can see through into the internals. I really like that aspect a lot with my builds. And just like the other builds, we can walk underneath the wings, right? Without crouching. It's a big design choice that I'm trying to adhere to with all my current builds. And also we can get under and into the internals by crouching underneath the engines so that we can make some repairs, make sure all the systems are plugged in, the pipe is all hooked up, all that fun stuff. That's what you really want to see when you're flying these things around. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of the general looks of it. I hope you guys like it. Let's go ahead and test some of its weapon capabilities. So we'll go ahead and spawn in 3 ships, not a giant. Well, actually, let's spawn this in just to see how much damage it can do against a big chunk of large grid. So we'll get 3 ships in. We'll do scout ship, light fighter, and heavy fighter. Though let's be honest, the heavy fighter and light fighter are about as tanky as paper bags. So we'll go ahead and pop this out. In fact, I'm going to make a copy of this just in case something goes terribly wrong, as it tends to do. We'll equip the rockets, and I want to try and hit these from the same location. So we'll go to the front side of these ships here, and we'll hit kind of down at them, front 45 degrees. Now again, this thing shouldn't be shooting at fighters. This really should be shooting at larger vessels or bases, but we'll go ahead and test to see how this looks. So 1 shot on a light fighter. Doesn't look like it was enough to kill it, but definitely crippling. And a 2nd shot, well, we took the head clean off. So the pilot's definitely out of commission. The rest of the ship is spinning, so it would technically eventually fall. You can see it rotating. But just to make sure it's kind of finished and doesn't fall anywhere I don't want it to, we'll go ahead and just knock it out of the sky. So 3 shots, light fighter destroyed. Now the heavy fighter is going to be interesting, right? So if we come back over here, I went ahead and shot it once. This armor plating on the heavier variant is much better at absorbing explosives than light armor. So this might take a couple more hits to get to the core, but once I'm at the core, it's going to fall apart just like the other ship, right? Because it's only being held together in a few key areas. You can see decapitated it right there. Boom. And the rest of it is starting to drift. So it is essentially taken out. So we'll go ahead and finish it off just like that. You can see it kept most of its shape, or more of it. You know, getting hit by 5 rockets. Here's the light scout ship. So we'll go ahead and just pop off a rocket at that. Let's see here. Wait for that dust to clear a little bit. It's listing. It's not really destroyed or anything like that. 2 shots? Yeah, 2 shots is enough. Took out all the internals. Oh my goodness. That was like the most beautiful crash ever. It like listed and then just kind of drifted down like a paper airplane. That was wonderful to see. Alright. Big question for this to be a successful bomber, right, is how well does it do against bases. So we'll go ahead and shoot this until we get all the way through it. So we already did. We already got through it. So 1 shot. Is that? I just want to confirm that wasn't a fluke. Yeah, so you can really damage a base with this, specifically light armor. I'm assuming heavy armor, of course, is going to be a little bit more troublesome for something like this, but overall, the rockets perform decently well. And again, the best advantage to them in this design is that it is reloadable. It can carry a lot of ammo in the internals. So, hope you like it. Anyways, that's going to do us for this episode. If you guys enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe for more creative goodness such as this. Hit that like button, and leave a comment down below on how you think it turned out, any other ship designs you may want to see, and also, thanks for watching. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.